obligatory internet hi, since I'm talking to someone who will be watching this in the past. It's always my favorite part. Um, Let me slow this down, hit play. Alright, so this is I think high silver loss on Dorado, is what you told me, around 1900. So I do these VOD reviews as a dry run through, meaning I haven't watched them yet. And the main reason is because I like to kind of just see everything and have a discussion about anything that I can. But throughout the course of it, I'm going to try to pick up on key specific things that may be hurting your play, and try to identify what you want to do and how you want to play your character to try to help you do that to the best of your ability, right? So if you're playing really aggressive, I'm not going to tell you that you can't play a really aggressive Reinhardt, or if you're playing really passive, I'm not going to tell you you're not playing you can't play a really passive Reinhardt. I'm just going to tell you how you can do it better. So we're gonna just kind of like go through this one at a time, and I'm always gonna treat everything like a discussion. I'm never gonna pretend like I know everything, but there are gonna be some things that I'm going to be able to help you, information that I have that you may not be aware of. So because it's a low gold game, high silver game, I'm not really going to be too picky about this, but it's definitely important that at the start of the game that you're shielding the door at that 1 second mark. It seems like you were away from your controllers, so that happens. But if you have the capability to, it's going to stop things like Junkrat spam, ash grenade, you know, echo pre-fire and stuff like that from chunking into your team. That stuff can get free picks, slow you down, give the enemies all charge you don't want them to have. So it's always good to be able to shield those things out of the gate. Oh, my hand was a little bit off. There we go. I have a feeling we're going to want to watch this game from a third person point of view. Okay, so I'm gonna comment on this because this was a similar thing we were saying when we were playing with you. But you retreat to the left side over here, but your healers are split off to the right, so it forces them to cross a dangerous gap of enemy sightline if they want to get to you. Now, this isn't going to be a huge problem where you are, because most people in this kind of like high silver, low gold range aren't going to be able to really hit that shot on a flying Mercy or Lucio zipping by, but it definitely is going to open them up to kind of like the opportunity of dying. And when you get pulled into those games, like I was platinum tank, and a lot of my other friends that we were playing with were scattered anywhere from, you know, like mid gold to mid silver, so you kind of wind up like that's how we got a game with you. But when you start pulling some of those higher players, like I'm sure I pulled in another high gold player or another platinum player, those people can actually hit shots, and those are the games that you're going to struggle in because you're not going to where it's easy for your supports to heal you. You're not paying attention to their ranges, their line of sights, and the zones that they're playing in. So if you could just be a little bit more aware of where your supports are playing, like you know they're going to be coming from the right side because that's where they started from. Like unless you saw them distinctly cross over to this left side, they're always going to be coming from spawn or hiding towards spawn, especially on this first point of Dorado. So you just have to start looking at where they are so that they can heal you easier. You're definitely going to get a lot of games where supports don't heal properly. I noticed this a lot during that whole, people would play Moira Ana and they'd both be DPS supports, and it was absolutely terrible. It built even worse habit than a lot of tank players because those tank players would not want to then depend on their supports. But we're slowly moving away from that, and we're beginning to get more supports in our games again that are wanting to heal more and more. And in those games, you really want to make healing for those supports as easy as possible. In the games where your supports aren't healing, I mean, you do what's easiest for you. I think you were going over to the Mega Health Pack for a second. That's a good idea if your supports aren't healing you. Mega Health Pack pulls you a bit too far away from the fight right now in order for it to get instant value, especially when you have both supports that can pay attention to you like they are. Okay, so I want to go look at your shield health really quick. Did I not? There we go. Wait, no, I'm dumb. My bad. So 944. Okay. It looks like you might have gotten called away. So I'm gonna watch at least one more fight before I say too much more. These moments where you're getting pulled away are definitely gonna hurt you. I mean, everybody knows you step away from the game, you're not gonna do better because you're not there. Your team needs you on some level, but just good to note that these moments are gonna take entire fights away from your team where you could have been winning potentially. Alright, so you're swapping onto the Diva. Okay, so since you're swapping onto the Diva, let's talk a little bit about what you were doing on Reinhardt here. So, in these fights with Reinhardt, it looks like your shield's going down very quickly. You're losing a lot of shield health very fast. And that you are... not pushing very far forward. So... This is kind of the duality of play styles in a certain way, right? When you play a certain way, you're going to require certain conditions to be met around you in order for that play style to be beneficial. And when you come up against some certain comps, your playstyle is going to get punished unless one of your teammates can perfectly fit around you. So this is what I'm talking about here to give you a more concrete example. You're playing a very passive Rein playstyle, right? So you're getting up to the enemies, and you're going to make a charge here, which was going to create a lot of chaos in the backline. But you're playing around directly shielding your DPS and your supports, which is to say you're playing kind of farther back, and you're just contesting the payload, making sure that the enemies have to stay on it too. And you're just shielding your DPS, expecting them to do all of the work to the enemy shield and all of the work to the enemy health pool. Now, I would like to imagine that in a Rein v Rein matchup, you would be a little bit more aggressive because you would see the Rein coming towards you, so you would have to swing on him as well. But since you're playing against Orisa, the other tank is always going to be forcing you to stay at a range when you play like this. And the reason is because when you stop to give your DPS that shield, and when you stand still and face the Orisa is going to have time to chip away at your shield, which means you can't then move forward. Generally, the optimal playstyle to start countering this Orisa Zarya is to move forward and give their shield real contest by getting to the other side of it. Now, there's going to be other dangers that you have to be aware of when you're doing this, right? Your supports can't heal through enemy shields. So you're going to have to be aware that your team has to push up with you. But there were some good opportunities where you could have taken space, like here. Here was a fairly good opportunity. I mean, you have 4 coming up slowly behind you, and the enemy team is all right there. But you could have stayed up closer to this shield in order to, force the enemies to think about backing up, to at least put pressure on the enemies in your own way, aside from just shielding your McCree and expecting him to be able to do all of the work. Because honestly, your team shouldn't be struggling this much against a singles Orisa shield when you have a Junkrat McCree. You should be able to just break it down and run through it. You have enough shield break between McCree, Junkrat, and Roadhog to break through it, but obviously your team isn't able to, and that's why the rest of them are in silver as well, right? Because they have deficiencies that they haven't been able to come to terms with yet. Your deficiency here is that you're not able to adapt your playstyle to the enemy composition. So let's start looking a little bit closer at the enemy composition to see what you really have to be aware of. So firstly, they're running a Brig and you're not. Unfortunately, in today's Overwatch right now, Brig is kind of just a linchpin of the support and backline. She's so stable, she's so hard to kill. and she just puts out so much accidental sustain for her team, especially with rally up, that it can be really difficult to get into a team that has Brig alive. Rissa's Fortify makes her that much more infinitely difficult to kill, and they kind of synergize well just because the Fortify allows Brig to accidentally keep Orisa up all the time, and Orisa accidentally can keep herself, or not accidentally, but can, you know, make herself harder to kill by hitting Fortify in the right time. So they kind of wind up complementing each other just by being hard to kill together. But the rest of the team is going to become a little bit more interesting because nothing else is strictly meta. Ashe is a bit meta, but she's not like super strong. She's just a good pick. She's viable. She's not broken. But, you know, Reaper isn't exactly what you would call meta right now. He's not bad, but he's not good. He's kind of a neutral pick. Mercy is always going to be a neutral pick, especially in the lower elos, because she doesn't require mechanical skill. So maybe this player doesn't have mechanical skill. This is one of her better supports. You can't really say too much about that. And then Zarya doesn't really synergize well with Orisa because Orisa doesn't want to play that aggressive playstyle that gets Zarya a high charge. But if we look at this Zarya, we could probably see that she does have high charge, and the reason she has high charge is because she hasn't died yet, right? So you took some time in the very beginning where you weren't there, and you took some time mid fight where you weren't there, and those opportunities would have probably been some of the better opportunities to, well, no, I don't want to say those would have been better opportunities to kill her, because what I'm just trying to imply is that your time stepping away made sure that the Zarya had less pressure on her. And the Zarya is going to be very important in this because she's going to be one of the highest damage outputs on this team, and the thing that's breaking your shield the most, right? Orisa is going to put a lot of pressure, Ashe is going to put a lot of decent amount of pressure, but the Zarya being at this comfortable range of her beam, being able to just absolutely zap at your shield is going to make it difficult for you to even want to push forward, or even difficult for you to play that passive playstyle and spend time hard shielding the McCree, right? Because with so little time of your shield being like alive and healthy, that means your McCree doesn't have a lot of time to hit shots or break shield. And I want to say it's your McCree because your McCree is the only one we've been consistently seeing behind your shield. I'm not exactly sure where your Junkrat's gone. It looks like he's gotten a pick now, so he's probably somewhere back in the flank. Let's go check that out now. Let's see where he is. Oh, okay. So he went up top bridge. It's not a terrible position. It's pretty good overall. But he's not playing from behind you, right? So he's not utilizing your defensive capabilities. He's not giving you value by sitting behind you, because that's really what your playstyle entails, is that somebody else gives you value by sitting behind you and doing work. Not always a terrible thing. That's largely what Orisa does. You're largely playing like an Orisa with the 1600 health shield. So really there's a lot more to gain off of kind of, you know, pushing forward, pushing the tempo, demanding space from the enemies by exerting your damage and kind of cleaving into the enemies. You also get shatter a lot faster that way. I mean, it's been some time into this game and you're 59 to shatter. I think you get a good percentage during this fight, maybe with the next fire strike after you get grabbed, but you could have definitely had a shatter by now simply by getting more into the mix of things and actually dealing more damage. Okay, so that fire strike is going to get it for you. Your shield's going to break. You hit shatter. Not a terrible shatter. It's unfortunate that Zarya was bubbled and the Orisa was fortified, because then you would have gotten probably all the way back to the Ashe, and that would have been a really big shatter. Your team would have been able to follow up on it pretty nicely, because if you could see, you have a bunch of ultimates, and the Brig isn't rallying yet, so you probably get away with just absolutely murdering the other team. But because they've grabbed it and now they're starting to move forward, everybody just panic pops their defensive abilities as they move forward, because they don't know no better. So it's poor timing in terms of like when you get it and when you actually hit it. You can't see that Zarya and that Rissa because they're on the other side of the cart. But just know that when they start walking forward into like a Grav or a Death Blossom or something like that, everybody panic pops their abilities. Like, you can always just count on that in this rank. So just, you know, a little bit more aggression lets you get a little bit more ult charge, lets you threaten the enemies and make them maybe they could possibly die earlier because you're actually exerting force on them and stuff like that. But your passive playstyle, you might as well just have played Orisa, honestly. It's not that you can't do that with Reinhardt. It's just that you're depending a lot on your randoms to be good enough to carry you out of this rank. And in order to really climb in solo queue, you need to be the best person on both teams. You need to be the one who's exerting pressure on the enemy team and protecting your team, especially as a tank. Tank is the most important role in the game. So there's just, you know, a lot of dependency in your playstyle, and it doesn't make it a bad thing. It just makes it unideal for solo queue. If you had a team where you had a DPS who was really good at hitting shots, even if he wasn't high ranked, then they would be able to be more comfortable playing around you, because I'm sure there's plenty of DPS in the low ranks who are in the low ranks because they hit shots but their tanks don't protect them, right? Like you've been mismatched with the wrong type of DPS largely. And I'm not saying that like you haven't been exactly screwed over by the matchmaking, but in a way we all have, I guess, because if we just got people with the ideal play styles to meet up with us, then, you know, we would probably all be a little bit higher. Okay, that was feeding, unfortunately. So as Diva, generally what you want to do is you want to fly to the high ground, shoot down on people, and then have the option to kind of like jump down to the low grounds so that you always have your boosters. But you don't have a shield anymore. No, your other person swapped to Reinhardt. I'm not sure if you would have noticed that at this point, but you fly right into the enemy team when they have a Reaper. You have nobody to back you up, and you can't do anything in that situation. And now you have to spend however long it'll take you actually trying to farm up this remake. Oof, that was close. Okay, so what's happened now is that because you went and you got demeched, you had to spend time farming up your mech again, and during that time while you were farming up your mech, your team has now gotten situated, and people are respawning and they're dying and whatnot, but your team began to get situated into their full fight. But because you were remeching, you were playing further back and having to reposition in different ways rather than being already situated forward with your team. So your team goes, you go forward, you get demeched, you drop back, your team goes forward, and then they start dying as you start pushing forward. And as they start dying, there's a split where this Reaper is in between. And here we can actually just watch it from overhead. Let me get you better positioning. How do you swing around like that, camera? No, we want to go back a little bit further. Put the spectate overlay on. Okay. I think even a little bit further than that. Okay, so there's the feed. Alright, so now your Junkrat's getting situated. You've dropped back. Your Rein's off respawns. He's coming forward. He sees you, or he decides to go this way. The Brig tells him no, and he decides to go another way. Okay, so now your team's fairly grouped, with the Junkrat kind of pushing into the backside and creating pressure. That is making this, again, an even fight because he's taking the Zarya away, which is whatever. Bob gets thrown out. Your Rein panic charges in. Classic silver maneuver. Okay, and then now by the time your Rein has pushed forward and died, there's been the split by the Bob. The Reaper's gotten into the back to be able to pick you because you're all over the place. And really, you not charging in too soon there would have allowed you to kind of pocket your Reinhardt, throw in a little bit more defense matrix on his weak side, make sure that nobody's kind of getting off to the side. I mean, there's roles and rules to playing Overwatch, right, that you can follow even if you're not communicating with your team. And the biggest thing that you have to know is what your responsibility is. So your responsibility when you're playing the main tank is to make space and to threaten the enemy with damage, usually, right? Or when it comes to like Orisa, you set up plays instead of you know, threatening enemies. You threaten abilities rather with Orisa. As an off tank, your job is to protect people who might be becoming vulnerable, like your main tank when they're committing to specific actions, your supports when they're trying to aid, or your DPS when they're trying to do something in particular. And threaten the enemies with damage. So both tanks can threaten enemies with damage. It's just that the main tank's job is to make space, that air quotes make space that everybody talks about, which is really just the action of kind of like putting pressure on the enemies so they can't be where they want to be. So if this Orisa is standing in the middle of the courtyard, that's where she wants to be, right? Force her out of there, get her somewhere else she doesn't want, take her space, you know, make that space yours. And then, you know, as off tank, it's going to be to protect people. So if you're Reinhardt swinging, as Diva, you should defense matrix. If the Reaper's on your flank into your backline, you should be defense matrixing him so somebody else can finish him off for free. There's little things that you can do as tank players to kind of like help your team get away and survive and do certain things. Sometimes it's really all about stretching out the fight so that your DPS have time to make picks. It's always going to be different. Unfortunately, your Junkrat dies and then the Ashe gets rezzed. Okay, so from here it's pretty much just gonna get snowballed, isn't it? You're just gonna get held here. You're swapping around tanks. You're not even getting ults up anymore. This person doesn't even look like they really know how to choose ball. You haven't left spawn in a little while. I guess you're trying to get people regrouped, I'd imagine. Or you're trying to, I guess, figure out what to play with ball, which is a fair thing to do. Good bubble attempt. Okay, now you're hitting your Y buttons. Now you've gotten good positioning now that picks have happened. You know, your DPS hit their Ys, they both got kills, there was space, you moved into that space and you took advantage of it. Alright, not too bad, not too bad. Enemy team has rally, and you have no ultimates left, but their Mercy is running for her life. Let's see if she gets away though, because if she doesn't get away, then that's their main source of healing just gone. Okay, so now they just have a Brig, but the Brig's pushed forward and she can get punished, and she does. So now they have no supports, and you should be able to cap this point because their only ultimate is off the board, and you should be able to match their damage quite easily. Okay, so they touch. Orisa goes down. Okay, good stun. You get 2 minutes on the clock. Nice, nice, nice. So this is largely a result of something that'll happen a lot in lower ranks. Is you go into the overtime timer and then everybody's like, wait, I have my Y button, and then they click it. The ultimates are so strong in Overwatch. You should be spending your time, like, you do a bunch of little things to kind of like maximize this, but the real arc of the game is farming ults and then using ults. So as a tank player, it becomes a little bit less important because you have such a strong cooldowns and abilities. But as a DPS, if you're ever playing DPS, your biggest thing should be getting off your ultimate, because your ultimate is your big shebang. It's your big kind of like, oh, now we hit all the damage and do everything we need to be doing, and we kind of roll the enemy team with this Y button. As a tank, it's still important to get your ultimate off effectively, but it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be the only thing you're doing, right? DPS, you hit shots and then you hit the Y button. As tank, you got to make space, deal damage, make sure you're paying attention to everything, and hit your Y button. There's just a little bit more to it. And that's why really tanks become the most important role in the game, is because they have so many more options in terms of how they can impact the game and what they can do. Unfortunate. And then the res. Okay, not bad. You're keeping the fight fairly even, or your DPS is keeping the fight fairly even at least. Okay, so let's talk about what it would require you to become aggressive, or maybe not aggressive, but at least take space in a way that'll give your DPS more time to you know, respond and make picks and stuff like that. So I don't have my marker tool up right now, but actually, how hard is it for me to get my marker tool up right now? Is it up? Oh, it's up. Nice. Okay, I don't know if you can. Oh my god. Overwatch. It's absolutely ruining everything right now. I can't get rid of it. Epic pen? Okay. There we go. That was super annoying. Okay, escape. Oof. Am I the only one who doesn't see my cursor? There we go. Alright, let's go back to that overhead. So we're going to start thinking of Overwatch, and I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm just going to go over it anyway, just in case you don't, right? But we're going to start thinking of Overwatch in terms of corners, right? So there's a corner here. That is thick, bro. Pen? Where's the thickness? Hold on. There we go. Okay, so we're going to... Jesus, I'm all over the place. We're going to think of this as 1. This is 2. As this is 3. And then up here, under here, you could think of this as 4, right? Sorry, my handwriting on the computer isn't great, but... So, each of those corners is should act as a checkpoint to you. It should be a mental checkpoint. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to acquire a pivot piece. So, if you want to deal damage, protect your team, or try to create space, you rotate around the corner, right, and move forward. If you want to reserve resources, wait for a little bit, or chill, you're going to go back around the corner. And the reason that you're going to pay attention to corners is just because it's going to make that rotation, that back and forth, very, very quick, right? So right now, as a tank player, you should be on this corner, like instantly on this corner, because there's no enemies here. You have plenty of space in between you and the enemy team over this long stretch under bridge, and it'll allow you to open and close the engagement as you please. Now, as you start to play this more and get more used to corners, you'll notice that there's a lot more areas that you can start treating as corners, such as like this spot right here, or even this spot right here. Over here can act as a corner. This usually can't act as a corner because the enemies are going to be looking this way most of the time, which means that they're going to be able to see both of these directions pretty easily. But this will be able to act as a corner. You could treat either side of this archway as a corner. Of course, these are corners. Up here, there's corners. There's a bunch of corners in this game, and they're going to become really important because they're going to give you control. They're going to allow you to open and close the engagement at any given time. So as a tank player, what you're going to look to do is you're going to look to go from checkpoint to checkpoint throughout the game, right? If the enemy is up here, right, then you're going to mentally say, well, my next conquest is to go from this corner, from home base over here, to this checkpoint over here, because this is the next space where I can have control over the game, open and close the engagement as I please. If the enemies are on top of the corner, you can still kind of utilize it to control the space, simply by, god damn it, simply by just, you know, like hiding around the corner from them. Let's get a little bit closer here. So if the enemies are right there, right, and you're right here, you can start doing different things and manipulating different aspects of the game, right? So something that pros will do a lot is they will block line of sight for all of the enemies except one. So essentially, even though you're in this situation right here where you're in a 1v3, like there's 3 people right there, the only person who's able to see you is this enemy Zarya. So you're essentially in a 1v1 because until that Reaper and that Orisa push around the corner, they can't do anything to actually hit you. Only this Zarya can. So your team can support you from here. Sure, the Zaryas could support her, but you already picked most of their supports, or like they're far away. But like your team could support you. You can fight this Zarya and basically make it so that she either has to push into you, win the duel, or back up to where her Orisa or Reaper are. Or you make it so that the Orisa or Reaper have to come help the Zarya, which gives your DPS opportunities to hit them because they're both low health now and they don't have any supports. Like, there's all sorts of things you can do by getting to these corners, isolating your line of sight so that you can only see one person at a time, and then actually taking advantage of what how the enemies respond to you, right? There's certain aspects of the game that are going to rely on you to manipulate what the enemy team wants to do by playing with spacing, and one of the basic ways you could do this is by going to corners and manipulating corners, opening and closing engagements, manipulating line of sight and such. But right now you're not doing any of that. In order to open the engagement, you have to take this wide strafe to the left, and then in order to close it, you have to take this wide strafe to the right. In that time, the enemy can still chase you. They could still keep the sight line open and stuff like that. You can't easily close it by just taking a half step over to the side. So let's look over here. Okay, so this is good. I like this positioning. Good bubble because it's possible that the Brig could have shield bashed that Moira in. Well done that. That's a good grab. Okay, good job. Good job grenading the feet, because that's something that a lot of like lower players, that shows your 2300ness coming out, right? It might be that Zarya is just one of your more comfortable characters. But your bubble timing does seem, you know, a little 50-50. Generally, you want to be actually, like, I know I said it was a good bubble because you bubbled the Moira before the Brig could shield bash her. Excuse me, sorry. But you generally want to be bubbling, like, either right after she gets bashed or during the bash animation, so that you could more accurately, like, just get that charge and confirm that she's actually going to hit her. But what winds up happening is because she doesn't actually commit to that and you bubble her, you don't have bubble to protect your Moira a little bit later. Gen chat's wild, fam. I don't know what that person just said. Something about German ramen. But yeah, you don't have your bubble later. But that's because you don't get the commitment, right? You don't have the reaction time to actually bubble her while the bash is happening, and you don't have the composure to wait it out to see if they're actually going to commit to her. Because even if she gets bashed, if you bubble her, especially a Moira has fade, she can get out of there no problem. But if you just like bubble her after the bash, so that she eats all the damage and lasts throughout the stun, the Moira can then do things to survive afterwards, and then you'll have either more charge, or if that doesn't happen, then you'll have the bubble to save her later when it actually does happen. Maybe just a little bit more composure on this. This is you overplayed your hand here. You gotta think a little bit excited that you had high energy. I don't think your monkey could necessarily keep up with how fast you were trying to move forward. He probably could have jumped in front of you, but it wouldn't have been a good jump, because then he would have had no escape. So let's put the overlay on, spectate overlay. There we go. So the team's coming forward, which isn't exactly the smartest thing, because if you play it slow and you see this Junkrat on the flank, if this Junkrat, you know, pops off, he gets, you know, 3, 4, maybe 5, 17,000 kills or whatever. But they're going to start wrapping around you because your Junkrat doesn't actually come to help you. So you overplay your hand here just by the simple factor of overestimating how good you can be on your own and not accounting for what your team is actually doing. So then you get wrapped around on. Your team can't help you because they don't have enough CC or body blocking or even burst damage here. Like, your McCree's not even here. It's just the two of you tanks. Like, you're the whole damage front right there. So there's no way for them to stop that Brig from stunning you. No way to protect you from that Reaper unless your monkey jumps in, which he seems to not have a good reaction time on that. So yes, your team could have saved you, but you don't depend on randoms. That's a misplay on your part, and you have to take accountability for where your misplays are. Alright, so that fight was a little bit messy and all over the place. There's a lot of Ys hit, which make it a little bit chaotic. But I think your bubble priority there was maybe a little bit off. I think in the beginning of that fight, you had to be a little bit more patient and wait for your monkey to actually engage so that you could properly bubble him. But he was out of your sightline, so you couldn't really do that. So after that, you kind of just have to wait and play passive and continue to back up. Because once your main tank goes down, you really lose your main focal point of like the enemies, like where you want the enemy's aggression to be going. So it becomes just a little bit more difficult for your team to stabilize that way. Yeah, kind of like the main tank offers so much structure and backbone to the team regardless of if they're a Hammond or they're, you know, a Reinhardt. So yeah, again, you just your bubble discipline is a little bit off because you bubbled that Diva when she dove in, but she was only diving in on a Mercy. It's not like you were gonna get real charge. It's not like the Diva was gonna be any real threat there. And then you didn't have bubble for when you actually would have gotten charge, which is when you were fighting the Zarya. And now you're only at 33 instead of potentially being at like a 50 or something like that. I think you wanted to bubble the Diva on that one. I'm gonna assume that. So that's on you, both you and the Diva partially. I mean, I'm not gonna expect you to. I'm gonna say that's like, you know, mulligan, you go again. But in the future, when you have the ability to start trying to think about what ults the enemy has and what you need to do to be able to shut them down. That's a higher level thing, though. I wouldn't worry too much about it. You don't need that skill to climb. That skill is something that you will need if you get up into like platinum, diamonds or something like that, you know, when you start getting into the high ranks where people can aim and they're like min-maxing everything they do already. Okay. Nice bubble. So this fight's gonna devolve into chaos, obviously. Unfortunate. I mean, I think that's something that you have to kind of like spend time watching and looking at. Well, never mind, I guess. But I think that's something that you have to spend time like looking at and watching and really understanding the fight. But it's also something that becomes a little bit more clear and organized as you go up the ranks. So in lower ranks, everybody's just going to be where they want to be. But as you climb higher and higher, the locations that people are going to kind of like find themselves in or want to be in are the places that are going to be optimal for their characters, which means what they do becomes a little bit more predictable. So as you climb the ranks, the game becomes a little bit easier to understand because everybody will be in predictable spots. So chaotic fights like that are a little bit more straightforward and like cohesively understandable because your Ana will always be on the back high ground, your Mercy will always be, you know, guardian angeling in the air, your Reinhardt will always be holding door or doing something in particular, and your DPS will always be abusing high ground or doing something else. Now to get to that spot, you have to figure out what your optimal location is for you, right? And I say for you because off tank is a very fluid role. It's something that, I mean, I can't tell you in that fight, like, oh, you needed to be specifically here. I think you could have held the doors a little bit more or rotated to an area near a health pack to be towards the top of the cart, and that probably would have been better. But, I mean, that's just because that situation was so fluid. I don't think that particularly would have saved you. But if you start finding your optimal spots, if you start doing well, those chaotic fights become easier the higher you go because everything becomes a little bit more like, oh, this person's here because of a reason. Not like, oh, we're doing ring around the rosy around the cart because we're panicking and trying to stall. You're running Roadhog Zarya, and that's very, very unfortunate. Because Roadhog offers no defensive utility, and it's going to depend all on your team's ability to actually frag in order to do this, right? You're going to have to get high charge by bubbling exposed targets and just absolutely shred through the enemy team. The problem is, what we've seen so far is that your team doesn't have the best damage output right now, and that could be for multiple reasons, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that your DPS are bad. It could mean that they have a lack of protection, right? If in this round your DPS can't do much, that's not their fault because you're not giving them much protection right now. Just like on that first point where you were just holding your shield, on the first point offense, when you were just holding your shield in front of them, it's partially not their fault because you're expecting them to do all the work. Here it's partially not their fault because you're saying, well, it's feast or famine, you either live or you die, and it's all dependent on whether or not you can protect yourself, and that becomes a very, very difficult thing as a DPS, somebody who's designed to be squishy and killable, right? Monkey instantly on top of them. What do you do against a monkey as a DPS? Well, apparently you play Junkrat. No, I'm kidding. It just can become very difficult. So this is going to depend on your team being able to frag. Your Roadhog obviously not able to stay alive, even though he has 1,000 abilities. It feels like to be able to do that. But like I said, Roadhog is one of those characters where cornering becomes infinitely more important, because if you play on the corner, then you can close the engagement whenever you want and wait for your cooldowns. So you're gonna unfortunately get out DPS right here. Both you, your DPS, and your Roadhog. I guess and your Ana too, technically. You gotta work on your reflexes for this grenade jump a little bit, because it's a little iffy. I like this what you're doing. Okay. I thought you were gonna give it up entirely. I would have given it up entirely, but that also requires your team to give it up entirely. So please bubble your Junkrat. Please bubble your Junkrat. Okay. Your Junkrat was just 1 health, and a bubble would have just helped him stabilize for a little bit. Protected him from any splash damage. I don't know why the enemy beat there, I'm not gonna lie. So generally, just as a forewarning, you don't want to use any ultimates when you've just capped a point. If you wind up dying, your spawn is right there. It does not matter. If you on the defense, you use ultimates, their spawn is right there. You do not waste much of their time, because they are just going to walk the 5 seconds it takes them to get back to cart and just be good to go. And you use an entire ultimate to basically buy your team 5 or 10 seconds, right? It's not going to be very valuable. Sometimes it can be good if your team is going to wind up snowballing and just full holding them there, but more often than not, that's not what's going to happen. So I was saying I like what you were doing before, because you were using the corner, which was one good, but I also thought you were going to retreat, which is what I was saying, but it would require your team to retreat with you, which isn't something that was likely to happen. Your Junkrat and your Mercy weren't good, but if you retreat there, you essentially give your team the ability to regroup and get a proper 6v6, rather than you like scatter jumping in there, right? If you get a 6v6 and you manage to hold them on this corner right here where you're currently standing, that becomes a pretty good defensible location. You have the high ground right above you. They have a choke that they have to walk through, 1, 2, or 3, depending on, let's make sure that this one right here, these 2, I guess, right here, and then this 3rd one back over here. And chokes are good for many reasons, but the main one is that it's good for splash damage, spam damage, and bottlenecking the enemy team so they're easy to hit. But your retreat there would have been good, because it would have allowed you to get a regroup. Unfortunately, your team doesn't do that. Unfortunately, you don't do that. It's gonna happen all the time in solo queue, especially especially in low ranks. Like, you're not gonna get that clean retreat there as much as you want it. Not a bad bubble, not a bad bubble. Pretty good bubble. I thought you were gonna not bubble her for a second. Okay. I do not know if you were in comms. I do not know if you were duo queuing. But this was a very risky grab, assuming that you were not. Because it was, I'm sure, a mere chance, if you were not in comms, this is mere chance that your Junkrat happened to tire at the same time. This bob came out as a reaction of this, but that grab was very far away. Your team is also very far away and has no chance of following up. And there was a good chance that there was no value that was going to come out of that grab. Now, if you're in comms, good grab. That was a great engage by your team. But if that was not purposely coordinated, that was very risky, and you got lucky. A good kind of thing to kind of try to get used to is like, just especially as Zarya is like spamming when you can't see the enemies and like retreating before they even really see you. So like, you could have spammed this angle, oops, before they really saw you, and continue to back up before they really got there. You would have gotten some, as soon as you see those splash ticks, you just start backing up. So you just spam a location, and then they have to walk through it. So as soon as you see those like damage ticks, you're just like, okay, now they're there, I have to leave. Because if that Roadhog lands a hook, then you're dead, and you lose all of your charge. So this is partially what I'm talking about with optimal location, right? Like, this middle of nowhere isn't doing you any good. There's no protection for you to hide behind if your bubbles run out. It's very far from any real cover because the cart is like, the cart is cover, but it's wonky cover. You could still see up, around it, and under it, so you can still get hit. So you really don't want to always be using it as your main source of cover. You really want to be closer to like actual map geometry, like this wall here. But like, you're just standing out in the middle of nowhere, and as soon as you get whole hogged, you're dead. There's nothing you can do about it. You use one bubble, and then you get absolutely rolled. So positionally, you're just a little bit questionable. Just as a side note, you can't do the nade jump in spawns. I don't know why. It's really annoying, but I think something about the healing effect in there. Yeah, so you also peek these angles too wide, because I don't think you're being conscientious of where the corners are, which is, I mean, it's gonna sound annoying after I say corner for the 10,000th time, but they're gonna be so important, right? Because look how much space you have here. This Ashe, if she's lucky, let's even say, not even good enough, let's just say if she's lucky, she could hit 2 headshots before you get back into cover. You really want to only give them the opportunity to hit 1 shot. This is as much space as you really need. You can kind of like slightly peek around the corner. You can kind of, you know, let's get into your like head height. You can kind of like do one of these and just like jiggle peek around the corner and just hit nades and stuff like that. Or just like beam random people as they turn their back to you, but you don't even need to go that far. Now there's a Reaper behind you. That's unfortunate. Gotta check your corners. Unfortunately, your mechanics became a little bit questionable there. Oh, sorry about the yawning. Just woke up. Yeah, that res was questionable as well. So, it's just an unfortunate thing that's going to prolong your respawning. If you're ever feeling in a game, and this is just a side note, like your mechanics are questionable, always feel free to just focus on the tanks and try to do your best to whittle down their resources. So even if it feels like you're not doing anything, by burning through that Sigma shield, you're making it so that your Ashe just has free range. Or wait, yeah, your Ashe, okay. Your Ashe just has free range to hit whatever shot she pleases. This will give her more time to hit shots. It'll make it so that, you know, she's shooting more throughout the match. Instead of just hitting a shield, she'll actually be trying to hit bodies. You could also just be farming that Roadhog for alt charge all the time, and taking advantage of Roadhog's biggest weakness, you know? So, like, you don't always have to just go straight for the squishies. I mean, there's going to be some games where you can't just go, like, whittle down tank resources. If you're playing against a double shield with, like, what you're playing right now, there's no point in even hitting the shields. You just have to go around them or get past them somehow. But, a game like this where they're only running a Sigma shield and they have a Roadhog, I mean, your resources are about as even as they're gonna get, I guess, in this rank. So you can just, you know, focus them down if you're ever feeling like your mechanics aren't up to par that day. And that's not saying this game is showing that your mechanics aren't up to par. I'd say your mechanics are okay. They have some deficiencies, but I mean, they'll get you through to, you know, like through gold and stuff like that easily. That's unfortunate. But yeah, this Sigma shield is just sitting up there. If you just keep whittling it away, it'll make them uncomfortable, make them hard to get any value. It'll get your Ashe a lot more value. Nice. You gotta get a little bit more used to camping that res and responding to that that audio cue of that little shimmering noise, because this Roadhog getting rezzed right behind you puts you in a very bad position because it sandwiches you between 2 people. The Sigma's backing up, so it's not going to be too bad. And it looks like the Roadhog just used his hook, but he's definitely going to be a threat with his shotgun. He is a form of a tank buster. Unfortunately, he's bad. Lol. This positioning is good if you have a Reinhardt, but you don't, so it's very risky because your ball can't do anything if they collapse on you. He doesn't have the mechanics to actually hit a pile drive in here unless he, you know, happens to get lucky. It's also going to take him too long to do any sort of swinging pile drive, because they would probably annihilate you even before then. But you're not blocking your team in any way, which is what you kind of need to be doing a little bit with bubble for your Ashe to kind of peek without just getting annihilated by all 6 people shooting at her at the same time. But also you're not setting up for like anybody pushing in. Like if you had a Reinhardt you set up there, then as soon as they pushed in, you get a bunch of cleave damage in, you bubble your Reinhardt, you get a bunch of charge, it's great. You can splash your nades as they walk in, it's awesome. But if you don't have like a Reinhardt or someone to sit there with you, then it's kind of scary because you're just alone. You can cleanse dynamite if you want to. It'll get you like 5 charge or something like that. A good boot by the enemy Lucio. Good job not running away, because that just would have prolonged your life, and there's no way you were going to escape that situation. You were going to get chased by at least 3 people easily. That fight's unfortunate a little bit. I think your grab was alright. You were a little bit further stretched forward than the rest of your team, and it was difficult for them to follow up on it. But also that the Reaper shows up in your backline and does work, right? So part of the reason, just to be aware that your team wasn't pushed up where you were, was because they didn't like those sightlines that you were offering them, basically. So your Ashe likes longer sightlines. Your Junkrat probably could have been there with you, but your Ashe and your Ana like longer sightlines that they want to like be able to see people in open space, and the space that you are in requires them to get close or have limited sightlines. So where you grabbed, you were on the right side of the door, whereas your team more likely would have been holding to the left a little bit, and they could have opened up that sightline if they could have, you know, maneuvered around certain ways, but more likely than not, it would have, you know, they would have had to get really close in order to see anything, and it would have either taken too long for them to close that distance, or it would have been risky for them, and they would have died to, you know, like they're long range characters. They don't want to get up in the face of a Roadhog Reaper or any of these other, you know, like Sigma, I guess. They're going to be cautious of those things. Not a bad bubble on the Bob, just to get you all charged. So don't be afraid to just hide sometimes. So you can get a lot of value off of just chilling on cart. So instead of like we're gonna go back, right? Actually, let's just rewind really quick so we can see a little bit better. Where are you? There you are. Okay, so you're going to spend some time here, and then you're going to go out to the right and push forward. You could have very easily rotated around this pillar and gone out to the left, and you would have had a very different like look at the game. Instead of having to, you know, like engage in this blubbery mess of 2 Bobs, a Lucio, and a Roadhog, you would have had a little bit more of a stable kind of like low health Reaper, easy to kill Ashe, and then, you know, Sigma's always there. But you could also just splash this. You just splash this and get more value than you can here. And you can also just chill and stall cart. Like if you just continue rotating to like right here, you can just chill back here and just buy time for your team to regroup. You don't always need to be engaging in a fight. You could also just be playing the objective or doing things to fuck with the enemy team. Unfortunate here that the enemy has a lot of wide buttons left over from the last fight. They didn't have to use a lot to get out into your team. Alright, unfortunate. All in all, I would say that your team wasn't very impressive. I would say that your DPS didn't have, you know, like that fragging potential that you really want them to have. They didn't seem to really have it clicking that day. And your other tank didn't seem to be doing too much for you. But you definitely had your supports with you for most of the time. And they were doing as decent a job of healing you as they could. And I think there were some fundamental things that you could have done to enable your team a little bit better. Get more value out of your main tank play, you know. By exerting the pressure and energy onto the enemy team, I think you can help your team out a little bit more and not depend on them hitting all all of the shots so much and so often. There's going to be proper rules of engagement, right? You can't just run onto the other side of an enemy shield or run into the enemy and just, you know, instantly expect to get more value. But there are things that you can start to look at in order for you to get more value. You can start like pushing forward with your shield up instead of standing still with your shields up. That'll close out different enemy sight lines and make them feel uncomfortable since you're better at close range. You can learn shield hopping techniques to in order to enable more mobility with your Reinhardt and stuff like that. You can flicker your shield and intermittently swing so that the enemy doesn't exactly know what you're going for, but they're still getting damage done to them. You can also, you know, just take off angles as Reinhardt sometimes if you want to protect the DPS who's on a flank or something like that. Like, you could go on a 2-man split and do different things, but mainly it's just doing things with Reinhardt is going to be better than not. If you want to play that passive playstyle, it's better to generally play Orisa. You can plop a shield down and act as a stationary kind of like stabilizer while still being able to put out you know, like output damage and such, and just utility too in the form of like pull and just your bullets, you know. Sorry, words stumble there for a second. But yeah, you could just play Orisa if you wanted to play Reinhardt like that. Like, there's no real value that you're getting out of Reinhardt by just kind of plopping him there and saying, all right, we're gonna wait until DPS get picks or something like that. As all tanks, you could be using cornering better. As Diva, you can be, you know, playing around people a little bit better, using the high ground a little bit better. That's one of Diva's and Winston's biggest advantages. I guess now Hammond too. But like, their ability to just get up on high ground, wait for their cooldowns, and then get into the fight with all of their cooldowns, including their mobility one, is probably one of the best things about their kit in general. And techniques like that can really help you climb all the way up into all of the ranks, right? You'll see monkeys in high ranks that are still kind of depending on those fundamental actions of getting to the high ground, waiting for their cooldowns, and getting in there. The difference between, you know, somebody who's doing that in a low rank and somebody who's doing that in a high rank is the person in the high rank knows exactly, you know, like, do I bubble here? How long do I stay? When do I get out? When do I go? Should I defense matrix? Should I use rockets on this person, or can I kill them with just my shotgun? They have better mechanics and stuff like that, you know. But you can at least start with the fundamental basics of getting to the high grounds, making sure that you have your cooldowns online, chipping damage from above and building ult charge, and then you see your team come in. Okay, now let me work with my team to actually get value. I hope that this is able to help you in some way. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, just let me know. You can message me. If you think that my coaching is trash, that's fine. It'd be like that sometimes, you know. But yeah, deuces.